hatred within the Labour movement. But it confirmed Kinnock in his determination to embark on a high-profile attack on the hard left within his own party, above all, the Trotskyite militant tendency.
Neil's tactic for dealing with the dissentients in the Labour Party was to detach the hard left, or as he would have called them, the illegitimate left, from the acceptable left within the Labour Party. He was, after all, a part of the acceptable left, and believed that they were the heart and soul of the Labour Party, and was certainly not going to do anything to damage them. But he was offended, I think, by the way their policies were being damaged by the illegitimate left, people who he believed had really no place in a democratic socialist movement.
I moved from a position in the very early 80s of believing that militant were a flaming nuisance but were handleable, to actually being convinced that they were a dangerous faction that were actually undermining the Labour Party, that they were a maggot in our midst. Tackling them was crucial, not merely in terms of convincing the electorate that we were electable and that we were a party that was in tune with them, but also in rooting out thuggery and bullying and the kind of anti-socialist behaviour which I discovered in Liverpool.
For years, the Liverpool Labour Party had been moribund, the fiefdom of an old-style Labour town hall mafia. As the city declined and social problems intensified, the militant tendency found fertile ground for recruitment. By 1985, the council was militant-controlled and committed to revolutionary overthrow of the established order.
Our position was that capitalism could no longer, and in fact that's been the position for decades, is incapable now of meeting the needs of the mass of the working people in this country, and indeed on a global scale, but particularly in Britain. You're only out to look at the lengthening dole queues, the appalling conditions that aged people lived in, the fact that in some areas of Liverpool, on some of the council estates, youth unemployment was in the region of 90%, 9-0.
Militant enjoyed a great deal of support locally. However, when senior figures in the Labour Party visited the city, they found ready ammunition for the leadership's campaign against the tendency.
They totally and completely used the Labour Party in a most sinister way to get what they wanted. In fact, some of the things that they did were corrupt. They used to fix jobs for people on Liverpool Council, when ordinary people were lining up in queues to get a job as, say, a school caretaker. Now, that is corruption of the highest order.
In February 1985, as Liverpool faced financial crisis, the City Council was investigated by Kinnock's Chief of Staff. He met the militant leaders Tony Mulhern and Derek Hatton.
They urged me not to meet many of the people that I in fact was going to meet, as they were anti-party elements, they were terrible people in various ways. And there was a real mood of intimidation. Intimidation is the only word that can be used about the way that many of the ordinary voluntary groups, the church groups and so on, felt about the way in which the council was operating.
As far as we could gather, he was on a fact-finding mission. With the benefit of hindsight, it was obvious that he was coming to Liverpool to see if he could establish points of support for Kinnock against us, against the council. So clearly at that early stage, it was obvious that Kinnock had started putting in place or preparing the ground to launch an attack upon the council.
In September 1985, the council used taxes to send out redundancy notices to its own workforce. This ploy to avoid government rate capping was a gift to the Labour leader.
I heard about it on Preston Station as I was coming back from the TUC, and I said to the people with me, I've got them, this is it. This is what I've been praying for. And so when we got to Bournemouth for the Labour Party conference, I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I knew how I could say it.
I don't think that
For Kinnock, the Labour Party conference in Bournemouth in 1985 was a turning point. The militant action in Liverpool offered a chance not just to attack the Trotskyites within the party, but it also gave him the freedom to lambast the pieties of Labour's left.
You start with far-fetched resolutions. They are then pickled into a rigid dogma, a code. And you go through the years sticking to that, outdated, misplaced, irrelevant to the real needs, and you end in the grotesque chaos of a Labour council hiring taxis to scuttle round a city, handing out redundancy notices to its own workers. I'm telling you, no matter how entertaining, how fulfilling the short-term egos.
And Eric Heffer stood up and he walked off the platform, and the theatre was magnificent. They played exactly into the hands of Neil Kinnock, in fact, because they were able to dramatise by that the whole way in which it went forward. And Neil, in fact, continued and delivered his speech word for word as it had been intended to be delivered.
I'm telling you, you can't play politics with people's jobs and with people's services.
Conference, I think, was like a great animal. It emitted a curious sound, as though it had been wounded by an unknown cause. It didn't know what had happened to it. And it sort of groaned almost. It was a peculiar noise it made.
We were absolutely outraged. Probably 2/3 of that conference rose in condemnation of that speech. And unanimously, the Labour group in Liverpool condemned the speech. Because what it was regarded as was the most treacherous act of betrayal, probably by any Labour leader since MacDonald joined the Tories in 1931. And that will live in the memories forever.
For Neil Kinnock, Bournemouth marked the moment of his initiation into the ranks of the right of the party. He'd come out openly and forthrightly against a section of the left. For the first time, Roy Hattersley acknowledged that the party was right to prefer Kinnock as leader.
Sometimes you have to force yourself to stand up to the ovations at the end. On that occasion, I didn't. I don't believe he did it in order to become popular. I believe he did it because he wanted to put the Labour Party right, and he had a burning hatred of people who were damaging the Labour Party. But he was certainly the moment when people knew how tough he was and how determined he was.
There's actually one better speech to be made. It'll be the first one that I make to address the Labour Party conference as Labour Prime Minister.
Labour leaders at Labour Party conferences, and I think it's still the case today, have never understood that if you devote even a single paragraph of your hour-long speech to shooting at your own side, it is that which will dominate the news in the evening. And it's a simple lesson that has not yet entirely been grasped, I think, and certainly never was in Neil's time. And they confused editorials slapping in the Sun, slapping Neil on the back for bashing a few Trotskyites in Liverpool over the head, with genuine popularity. But of course the Sun was nowhere to be seen come the general election.
In the aftermath of Bournemouth, Labour's National Executive Committee began the process of expelling the militant tendency. Suspected militant activists were summoned to party headquarters to be questioned, and if membership was proven, expelled. As they arrived, militant organised demonstrations of support. For many on the left, like David Blunkett, this was a turning point. They could either pragmatically follow Kinnock, or they could resist expulsions in the name of freedom of speech and belief.
It was a difficult period because I was breaking with people who still believed that militant tendency weren't a threat, who still believed that they were good socialists, who still believed that because they'd done one or two things in Liverpool which were undoubtedly beneficial to the community, that somehow we should pat them on the head and patronise them and say there's nothing to worry about. It was difficult personally, and it was difficult politically, but it had to be done. It had to be done in order to save the left of the Labour Party. Otherwise, I think we'd have been completely wiped out, and to play a mainstream role